It's time to take a deep breath and quiet the mind. Every breath and thought was energy that brought us to our experience in this moment. We are going to exercise our beliefs in the possible. We will bend and create our own realities. Let's explore how to square our recovery and thrive in life. I welcome you to Recovery Squared Radio with your host, Steve Wofford.
Hello, everyone. I have Vidals Jr., and he is a coach, speaker, writer, and published author. The reason I wanted to have him on the show is we are part of some of the same communities, and his story stood out to me because he has a story of thriving after having one of his rock bottom moments. And so I really loved his story, and he's another podcaster. So I got a chance to get to know him a little bit over listening to his podcast, and I was so intrigued with his story that I thought I'd have him on the show. So Vidal, thanks for being on Recovery Squared.
It is an honor. Thank you for having me, Steve.
We kind of got a basic introduction to you. You know, what originally intrigued me about was your story was, high-speed chases on the freeway and withdrawals from alcohol, I believe. So I look at you now and I'm like, wow, how does a person that was at such a rock bottom place get to where you're at, where you're helping people transform their own lives and thrive? So why don't you give me a quick rundown of what brought you to that moment, and then we can start digging in and how you created this thriving life that you have now.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, I just want to say I love your podcast, Recovery Squared. That's what my podcast is all about, the thriving beyond part. And that's my story in a nutshell, evolving and not just recovering from what I was going through. So years back, Steve, back in 2009, just to be exact, things were at such a tipping point where reality for me, reality was so far gone. I didn't know who I was. I was out of control. I had become this reckless situational alcoholic, and I wanted my life to shift radically, and I didn't know how to do it, Steve. So what I turned to back then was sitting on a bar stool and self-medicating myself with alcohol, whatever I could get my hands on, just to numb the pain. And then once that reached a plateau, I began to seek something to numb that pain further. And that's where I needed some adrenaline. And when I say adrenaline, I mean getting behind the wheel, already inebriated, and hitting the freeway at crazy speeds. So I did that recklessly. And because I had worked with sheriff deputies for a long time in my freeway project management career, I built friendships. And in the back of my mind, I had this get free out of jail card. And I almost felt untouchable. And I knew that I was going to hit a breaking point. Either I was going to end up hurting myself, flipping my SUV over, or I was going to end up hurting somebody else. And that's exactly what happened on one fall night, downtown in Milwaukee, where I'm from. I got behind the wheel, hit the freeway. I was doing probably 120 miles an hour. And on the sheriff deputy's dash cam, I was a little blurb, just and went by. And he finally got close enough to me when he saw that I got off downtown and I hit an off ramp. That's when he proceeded to get closer in pursuit, but he was still probably 10 blocks away. And in my mind back then, Steve, I was like, there's no way he's following me. There's got to be no possible way. So that's when I told myself, all right, if he's following me, we're about to find out. So I made a couple lefts, right, and another left. And I even slowed down to make sure that if he's chasing me, I'm going to see him right now. And there he was again. I was like, oh, brother, I'm going to end up losing my license. I'm going to lose my job because I was in a transitional job with the CDL. So I was going to lose that. And I kept thinking, I can't get caught. I can't. So that's when I began to lose the sheriff deputy and I started cornering blocks downtown. As I'm making and rounding these corners, I saw that he couldn't keep up. He was in a Tahoe. I was in a Grand Cherokee V8 SUV. It was a little bit more maneuverable than his. And I ended up losing the sheriff deputy not once, but twice.
Wow.
And then things got really hairy, Steve. I was freaking out, just having this out-of-body experience. Like, who the heck are you? You are not this guy. What is going on with you?
I bet.
And I can laugh about it now, but back then, that was the biggest adrenaline rush that I know I'll probably have next to jumping out of a plane, right?
Right.
So I ended up just panicking, freaking out. There was only a couple corridors that you could get out of the downtown area here in Milwaukee. So it's either north, south, or west corridor. So I ended up picking the south corridor, and holy cow, I ended up crashing into a PT Cruiser, and the driver was also inebriated, and he had a blinking yellow. I had a blinking red. I rolled through the stop. It was one of those slow motion kind of experiences, just surreal, and time stopped. And then that's when I just knew, after that impact, that's it, brother. Like, something has to change right now. You got to stop doing this. And as I sat there and I saw the airbag exploded, and I saw the PT Cruiser had spun almost in a 360-degree spin backwards, and I saw them get out, and they were okay. The driver did suffer a broken collarbone. I nailed him on the passenger wheel well side, and I was freaked the heck out. I sobered up so quick, Steve, in just those little microseconds. I kept thinking of my kids, my family, like, what are they going to think? What are they going to do? I'm probably going to get locked up. I just was freaking out, but I knew I was done running. In that moment, Steve, I knew I was done running. I was so out of control. And then that's when the sheriff deputy catches up to me. Gun drawn, adrenaline rushing, adrenaline pumping on his end. And he just yelling at me, and I'm just as calm as a cucumber, just shell-shocked.
Well, I bet you just got to be at a place where I give up.
Yes. Threw the keys at him. I said, officer, I'm not going anywhere. Here's the keys. You can see the Jeep is smoking. The front end of those Jeep Grand Cherokees are like tanks. It absorbed the impact, but the engine took most of the blow. So I wasn't going anywhere. And before the sheriff deputy came running after me and got there, I was actually thinking in the back of my mind, like, what if I run? What if I just get home? No way, dude. Like, stop thinking that way. It's going to come back. He's going to handcuff you the next day in front of the neighbors. Just calm down, relax. It'll be fine. And that's when I gave into the transformation that was about to happen the next 4 days, as I sat initially arrested in jail, and I had never been in jail before.
Wow.
So in the back of that squad car, once I got handcuffed, I sat there and I sobered up even more so. And hours passed. I refused a breathalyzer, thinking I could outsmart at least some part, at least the alcohol level that was about to show up on that breathalyzer. I refused it. So they had to draw my blood at the hospital. It took probably like 5 security guards, a couple nurses, and some sheriffs just to hold me down. They were getting frustrated with me. That's how messed up I was. I just thought, you know what, let me just keep fighting, and maybe it won't be that bad.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't matter. It was bad. No matter what I was going to do, it was just, it caught up to me. So finally, sitting in the back of the squad car, sheriff deputy, after he's done writing his paperwork, he looks at me in the rearview mirror and says, look, man, what's going on? Like, you have a squeaky clean record. You're in your 30s. There's got to be something going on. What's the story? Mm-hmm. So I told him the story. I told him all the sheriff deputies that I knew by first name. And then he says to me, Steve, why didn't you tell me this before? I would have let you go. The paperwork is written. I can't change anything. And in the back of my mind, Steve, I just kept thinking, that is exactly why you need to go through this. And even though I was so scared of the unknown, I knew it was just something I had to go through, because sooner or later, Steve, it was going to catch up to me. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather go through that looking back at it now than end up, rolling a car over and paralyzed or something, or hurting somebody else. And luckily, the driver that I hit, he only suffered a broken collarbone. And that's when I ended up serving half a year for that reckless driving and then injuring another driver as well. And that all stemmed from just some trauma that I was going through because of one specific event in my marriage, Steve. So I'll get into that in a second, right?
Okay.
The transformation, those 4 days, Steve, where I was initially incarcerated, man, I sat there that first day in that jail cell, freaking out, going through with alcoholic withdrawals, wondering, when is this going to end? God, I was looking to the ceiling of that jail cell thinking, God, can it get any worse? Like, seriously, God, can it get any worse than this? Like, I'm already going through seeing my wife, my then estranged wife, with another man, pregnant by this other man that I'm dealing with. And I was separated. I was just losing it. And I'd gone through so many physical changes. Well, I lost so much weight because when you're going through something like that, you just can't eat, sleep. Your nerves are always just wired on high. And going through those withdrawals, I started praying and meditating on, if this can't get any worse, like if this is the bottom of the bottom, okay? If this is what I got to deal with, then there better be some good stuff coming. God, please.
Right? Right. That's so powerful. And, the one reason I wanted to start podcasting was because I used to have these magical conversations. And to me, this is a divine appointment because there's so many similarities in our story. I went through opiate withdrawals. I didn't really do a jail thing. I've been in a few car wrecks, but one of the things that caused my transformation was my wife's affair. Like, talk about the gripping pain. And I had to leave that marriage. And so I so can relate with all those different things. I actually just shared on podcast number 7 just a couple weeks ago. And it's the first time I really shared it on a podcast per se, but I can definitely relate to all those feelings. You're just going, like, hey, there's something outside of myself that is destroyed from where we can see, and we depend on those things and we just feel helpless. It gets us to the place where it's like only God can help us.
Yes, absolutely, Steve. And thank you for sharing that with me because I did not know that. So, you're familiar with the rock bottom and the roller coaster emotions you have after you've been with somebody for so long. I was with her for 15 years, married for almost 7-8 years. And now, hindsight 2020, looking back, I'm like, wow, how did I get through that? And I remember it every single day. I would just take it one day at a time. And I remembered I disliked when people would ask me, how am I doing?
Right. Yeah. Don't ask me that.
Please don't ask me that. What I did to combat that, Steve, back then is I said, I'm outstanding. I'm feeling great. I'm grateful. And I began to pray blessings for my estranged wife and for the man she was seeing and the unborn child. I prayed blessings. I actually went to some rummage sales, and this was still when I wanted to make it work. I went to some rummage sales, purchased some baby clothes, and I gave her a big bag of baby clothes. And I said, look, even if it's not mine, I'm willing to make it work. But that was before I had left and just fully began the whole separation process. And then as I saw, Steve, that I was just like really losing my mind, like, holy cow, can I really do this? Can I really deal with somebody coming to my door, picking up his kid, and me maybe not being there? Am I okay with that? Man, it tore me apart. And what was best for my health, my happiness, was to let all of that go, Steve. And as much as I love my family, as much as I love that dynamic and all the blood, sweat, and tears you put into your house, the white picket fence, the whole 9 yards, everything, it absolutely sucks to let it go, but it's the best liberating thing that you can do for your life. Because a lot of times we're just chasing the Joneses. We're not even happy with who we are as being just a provider. We lose our identity. I lost my identity, Steve, through that whole workaholic road construction career phase. I lost who I was. I took on my coworker's identity. Like, I wasn't myself anymore. So it was a blessing to go through that and finally get myself back together again, Steve. And thankfully, the judge appointed some professional psychological help through a therapist, and that definitely helped because I was going to church counselors and doing the self-development stuff, but that was only so much. I needed professional help.
Yeah, I hear you. Wow, there's so much I relate to that because, just like you, I was a professional IT consultant. I had a very good career and I was also an entrepreneur for many years and I was very identified with my career. I was identified with being a family member and I was identified with being a partier on the weekends. But when you're not whole and complete, you can't fully love someone else unless you fully love yourself. I could get rid of the drugs and alcohol pretty easily, but getting rid of someone that you've been with for 20 years and breaking of your family and deciding to let go so you can save who you are is a very consuming thing because we are so programmed and conditioned and living with these families and the illusion of being all together. And it's counterintuitive. I don't know if you experience this, but I was like, wait, I'm supposed to walk away from this. I'm supposed to get better and break up my family. And I didn't know how to do that, to be honest with you. Like at the time I had a sponsor and he kind of made me aware of the position I was in and what I needed to do. So I really had to be, mentored by people and coached by people. I hired people that specialize in affairs and coaching through those sorts of things and divorce. And, I did a lot of personal development in church classes. Then I started realizing it's just a cycle of improving and becoming whole and complete. And you got to walk away from those that are not serving your highest purpose that might be holding you down. And sometimes it's your own kids that you have to walk away from. It's your spouse that you've been away from. And that's a very counterintuitive thing because how do you walk away from a family, especially one that's all you know?
That's a great point, Steve. One mantra that I used before I finally left the house because I had those limiting beliefs holding me back, saying I can't be the person to break up the family because when I married the mother of my daughters, it was for the unity of the family, for the institution of the family and the marriage and all that good stuff, all it brings to solidify it for my daughters. And now I was going to annihilate it and allow it to be annihilated. And then I was angry at her for making me do it, making me leave. There was just anger and rage that was beginning to spill over. And Steve, I tried everything I could in my willpower to not be angry, to not let those feelings hurt others. But anybody out there listening that is angry and has rage, you have to express and find a constructive way to release those feelings. You should honor and respect every emotion. We suppress our emotions. We hold and bottle them in until they come rushing out one night like they did in full rage as I ended up losing a sheriff deputy twice and injuring a driver. So I knew I hit that tipping point, but it takes courage to ask for help. But when you accept it and you're vulnerable, there's actually power in that. And it isn't just the self-development, but it's the therapeutic part of it. It's even for me, podcasting and writing and speaking, to me, it's therapeutic. When I share my story, people connect with it. Just like you mentioned, Steve, so many people nowadays have gone through everything we've gone through. I had mentors and people that helped coach me through that process. And they said, look, you're not the only one.
Right.
And I said, really? Okay. Tell me somebody that has gone through what I'm experiencing right now, please, because I want to meet that person. So they made me eat my words, and I scoured the Milwaukee area, and I found two people. And what I found and I discovered, Steve, was that they were not happy. One person stayed, the other person didn't. Ultimately, they weren't happy, and that was enough evidence for me to confirm that I needed to carry on by myself, and I needed to find myself and create this new identity as a divorcee, as a father. And the mantra that I used to help me as a father leave that family dynamic in the same household was that no matter who comes in to take my place, if it's a stepdad, their mother's boyfriend, whoever it is they will not take my place. I was there from day one, and I will continue to show up and stay in their lives, because now I am going to ask permission to be in their lives. I'm going to call them. I'm going to write to them. I'm going to do whatever I have to do. And I wrote to them while I was in jail. I spoke to them. I called them. It cost me thousands of dollars to do that while I was in jail. But I made it my mission. I made it intentional to continue and further deepen my relationships with my daughters. And that's exactly what happened, Steve. Divorce doesn't separate you further from your children. It actually brings you together with them, because let's just face it, most husbands allow their wife's family to be the primary quality time. Let's just be real, okay? And that's okay if you allow it. But
right.
I was against that. I started getting lazy and started saying, oh, yeah, we don't have to go by my family. That's okay. We'll just focus on yours. I allowed that. So we allow that as fathers, as husbands, as ex-husbands, to continue that. So when I stepped into this divorced dad, I said, you know what? That's great. I'm going to call the shots with our time. We're going to get back, and my daughters are going to know my side of the family, my culture, everything that we're about. So this is actually a blessing. And I started seeing the opportunist side and the optimistic side of things versus the negative and the pessimist side of, oh, woe is me. This is horrible. And it's so hard to think that way. But when you pray and you start planting those seeds and you ask God to bless them, you send ripples out into the universe saying that you want to be heard and you want others not only to connect with you, but man, to love you. That's all I'm about, is just love and affection when it comes down to it, right?
Yeah, I love that. You know, one of the things I notice in my coaching business is that, and this mirrors my path and what you're saying, was that when I left my family, I was not breaking up or destroying my family. I was creating a new family dynamic that was serving to me my purpose and what I thought was best for my boys. And I'm actually on the tail end of a 2-year-long divorce and custody proceeding, because I'm not going to just do like I did for so many years, where the mom is, mom will take care of the kids and kind of dad can go have his cocktails or whatever, that kind of thing, where it's just the kids. It's like, no, I need to stand in this. I need to raise men for the next generation so we can have less people that are doing this. And one of my missions is to help dads become and stand in this, which is ultimately love, right? Because, we have to really show men how to be men, and they don't do that. We don't do that by going drunk, getting high, and using things outside of us to change the way we feel. And so it's very powerful what you say, because I want to empower people, and specifically men, and I have to lead by example. And so when I don't feel like something's loving to do, then I don't do it. And for one guy, that might be, hey, you go pay child support. In my case, I didn't feel like that was the loving thing to do, that I needed to be the primary parent in my kids' lives. And so that's one of those things that we have to deal with in our society.
Absolutely, Steve. It's so hard as someone that's been through the separation and the divorce and then having another child involved, Steve, where you have to bring in a guardian ad litem. I understand things from a judicial standpoint and also from an emotional standpoint. And then there's the kid, our children's standpoint, where they don't need to be put in the middle of things. And as a person that had to make mistakes to learn, you have to have that direct contact with their mother or your ex, because it does ease the stress on your daughters, on your kids, on your children when you're going through that process. And then there's the regurgitation that our children give us from our ex or their mother, their father, whoever it is. And you got to see it as they're just regurgitating something that they've heard. So don't take it personal. Just keep showing up and build that relationship with them. Then you'll see that it's not about picking sides. It's that they love both of you. And ultimately, every kid wants their parents to be together. I mean, that's something I think that never goes away, especially my 11-year-old, she still harbors those feelings because we got divorced when she was so young. My oldest, she's 17, so she experienced us and she understands that mom and dad would fight a lot. So I get it. They weren't happy. It's okay. Divorce happens.
So you're learning how to be a single dad and dealing with the dynamics of a separated family or a blended family. What brought you to your calling in helping people thrive? Tell me a little bit about that.
Absolutely, brother. Man, what brought me to my calling, my mission, was initially going back to when I was first incarcerated, those first 4 days. As I was fasting and praying, I began to connect with others that were reading the Bible, reading inspirational things there. As I connected with them, as they saw I was fasting and praying, they welcomed me along into their prayer groups, and their prayer group was held in the library of that jail. And I'm talking specifically about inmates that had been in the jail system for a long time. So they were there to see the federal judge. This federal judge was going to try them or dismiss their whatever the situation was. And a lot of them were murderers, rapists, just the worst of the worst. So as soon as I found that out, yeah, it did kind of freak me out a little bit.
I bet.
But what I saw in some of these inmates, I didn't see the person that committed those heinous crimes. I saw the transformed inmate, person that had did the time, that had went through the whole imprisonment life, and they used that time wisely. They didn't squander that time. They worked on themselves. And in seeing that, it made me believe that I am not just here to judge anyone. I walked out of there not being so judgmental, because if I could go through all of this stuff that I'm going through at that time, then guess what? So can anybody else. And since then, Steve, I've seen a lot of friends and even some mentors go through similar situations. So when I say that you got to be careful and think that it can happen to you, it can. So in that library, in that jail cell, is where I prayed with these other inmates, a lot of them strong Christians. And with the fasting and praying, Steve, it put me on a whole different vibration, man. I was shackling the physical form, right? So if you're familiar with religious beliefs, no matter what your religious belief is, if it's God, source, universe, whatever your belief is, once you fast enough and you shackle the physical form, you're actually allowing your intentional you, your soul, the spiritual you, to begin to step in and actually start carrying the rest of you. It's almost like when you've worked 20 some hours. I don't know if you have, Steve, but I have. And
yes,
you're running on fumes, right?
Yes.
And there's this part of you that carries you to the finish line. You don't know where it came from. It's just the spiritual you. And that's just the way I see it. The intentional you that carries you there. So I was pushing myself beyond my physical limitations. And in doing that, I started connecting and seeing what God saw, maybe perhaps, that everyone deserves love and that we are love once we step into it. That's the highest vibration that we can ever step into. The highest, what I mean by highest, I mean the strongest vibration there is in the universe is love. Now, this might sound cheesy, woo-woo. This might sound like Soulful Sunday on the Oprah network, but this is the reality that I found for myself. And that's when the transformation began to happen. And I left those 4 days being initially incarcerated a new person. Because a lot of those inmates, when I shared my story, and a lot of them didn't know about personal development, which I had stepped into. And for those 4 months before my wife confessed everything to me, I had hired a successful mentor. He introduced me into personal development, entrepreneurship on another scale, so on and so forth. So I understood those universal and success principles. But now I understood the power that we possess in our spiritual form, because there is this, if you're familiar again with the religious undertones, that we are more than just physical bodies having a spiritual experience. We're actually spiritual beings having a physical experience. And once I felt that, I understood it, and I experienced it, life did begin to transform. I saw the world completely different, and that was the beginning point of my journey on the transformative end. And lo and behold, months after that, actually weeks, I began to connect with abundant opportunities, and things started taking off. And in that library at that jail cell, by the way, I read a book, the original Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Wow.
And reading the 101 stories in that book, back then, I had never read it, but I heard a lot about it. So being in self-help, I kept diving into all this personal development and self-help stuff because it inspired me back then. It's the only thing that motivated me. So I read that book from front to back. And some of those stories, Steve, were cheesy, but they made me feel better. Like there was just something uplifting about them. And then one of these little thoughts, just a flyby thought, went by, and I thought, maybe if I get through this situation, my story could be in there as well. Who knows? Didn't think anything of it. Years later, now being last year, my story was featured in Chicken Soup for the Soul, and I had a culmination moment last year as I had been plastered back in 2009 on local news in my area. Now I was on local TV shows as an author, as a published author in Chicken Soup for the Soul, and being on TV and doing the media spots and the Barnes & Noble book signings and book talks. It was just incredible. That was the culmination point, the full circle moment that said, okay, you went through that for a reason, and now other people can be empowered. And now I help other people empower the masses as well through helping them craft their story and helping them gain exposure, whether it's through large publications, whether it's writing a book, whether it's getting on podcast shows like we're doing now. So that's kind of what I'm doing currently.
Vidal, man, I love it. Amen to everything you said. There's so many things that we're in alignment in. Just so the listeners know, we haven't really talked before, but there's just so much about your story. I took on personal development so much. I'm like, wait, I know this stuff so well now. Why don't I just make that my job? Because I love it so much. And like, it's my true calling. You get to this place when you jump into your purpose and talk about living as a spiritual being, you get to this place where it doesn't matter how your body shows up because you're able to accept it and love it for what it is. And you're able to tell the difference between the mind, your thinking mind, versus your true essence. You know, a lot of the work I do is, I call it inner child work. And really, it's connecting that divine essence within you. Some people call it your inner child. Sometimes people call it the Christ within, or God, or source, or universe. I try not to get into the specifics of what people want to call it. Me personally, I am a Christian like you, but I also love what you say about, you know, the vibrational levels of love. And that's really our highest state of being. And that's when we operate on, you know, more of a spiritual plane. And like, to me, this conversation are the fruits of just living like that. Two people have divine appointments, and we get to co-create things like this in the name of serving other people out of love. So I really love everything you said about that. And I have one really final question for you. And I ask all my guests this. It's that if you had to do one thing to square your recovery, to take your life to the next level and thrive, what would that one thing be?
It goes to how the question is actually versed. I've gone through the AA stuff, you know, and gone through the 12-step process, which helped me recover in a sense. But recovery is just about surviving. So you're going back to who you were. And my podcast and my book and everything that I'm creating currently is about the thriving part. So you're evolving. So think of, for example, 3 trees. This is kind of the story that I like to share with audiences when I'm talking about the difference between surviving and thriving. So there's 3 trees, all the same specific makeup and everything, right? Same size trunk, same size branches, same leaves, so on and so forth. Now, a storm comes through. Each tree takes the storm. The first tree is the strongest. It takes the storm, but doesn't budge. It's like an oak. The second tree, kind of like a bamboo, bends, but goes back to its same standing point. The third tree, it bends like the bamboo, but it comes back and it breaks. Now, the first tree is super strong, like a lot of us men are. We just take everything on like sequoias, like just this strong oak, right? But there's no transformation. The second tree, like a bamboo, bends, comes back, it recovers, it survives, it made it through, but there's no difference. Nobody knows what it went through. It looks the same, just like the other first tree that didn't bend, didn't move. The third tree that was broken and had a large limb broken off, now after days, months, years, begins to have new growth, and it is thriving, and it is taken on a new identity, a new shape, a new form. It has separated itself from those other two trees that you would have not noticed went through that storm, right? So the thriving tree evolved into something different, right? And that is the essence of the lesson that I learned going through all of this, is that I had to step into a new identity and I had to evolve. And it's scary stepping out of your comfort zone. It sucks. I'm going to tell you, it sucks a lot of times. But for myself, I was thrown into this situation as if God was like, I'm going to throw you into this fire. But guess what? That fire is going to transform you and mold you into something bigger than you could have ever imagined. But going through that process, letting go, Steve. Right now, our hands are gripping onto that past, gripping onto that old life. And we don't want to let go, even though that it's hurting us. It's just agony and pain. And we keep hanging on to the misery. But when I let go, Steve, and I opened my hands and pointed them upward and said, okay, I'm ready to receive God. Just like a little baby ready to receive that hug from their parent. I'm ready for it. That's exactly what I did. And that's when the evolution and the thriving part came in and the blessings started pouring down. But it doesn't happen until you let go. And it sucks. But going through everything I went through, I learned that lesson that I wasn't just about the recovery and the surviving part and the existing. I didn't want that anymore. I didn't want the simple, ordinary life. I wanted the extraordinary life, Steve, where I'm thriving and evolving and becoming something. I have no idea at the end of the story how it's going to end, right?
Right.
But I love the journey, man, of thriving.
Well, I love that. Well, man, you are a fine example of what squaring your recovery means. Because like you just said, it's like recovering, but we're able to step into the areas that we're broken that's going to take us and catapult us to that next level and have this compounding effect to where, you know, we can affect the greatest change. I so appreciate you, Vidal. I thank you for sharing your message, and you have a very powerful story, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, brother. It has been a blessing, and I just want to thank all the listeners out there. And actually, I want to give them a gift. If you go to yourfreegift.us, I want to gift you my story that was featured in Chicken Soup for the Soul in PDF form. So if you go to yourfreegift.us.
Thanks. That's awesome. I encourage all you to check that out. Again, Vidal, thanks a lot. I appreciate you, brother.
Thank you, man.
I was so amped to have Vidal on the show with me today, and I think you'll find his story as inspiring as I did. I'm so honored to call him a friend. I'll put the show notes up at recoverysquared.com/16, where you'll have access to all the links from the show in the chapter where Vidal shares his story in Chicken Soup for the Soul. And when you visit recoverysquared.com, I also want to send you the pathway to believing in the possible, to complete transformation, like Vidal and I experienced. I'll email it to you when you click the Get Access button on recoverysquared.com. I love you, and thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to Recovery Squared Radio. Please visit recoverysquared.com for access to resources on squaring your recovery. And as a reminder, act without doing. Create space between your thoughts and actions.